The night was cold and the wind was full of dust. Ethan Cole sat behind the counter of his small inn at the edge of the ruined colony city. The neon sign outside flickered again and again. Showing half of the word rooms, he was tired, his hands greasy from fixing the heater that never worked right. The streets were silent except for the hum of patrol drones. He told himself he would close early. No one came this late anymore, especially not after dark when the sirens warned everyone to stay inside. Then a soft knock came from the door, slow and weak. Ethan froze for a second, listening, thinking maybe the wind had hit a loose board. But the knock came again, trembling like the hand that made it. He opened the door just a little. Outside stood a small figure wrapped in a torn blanket, rainwater dripping from silver hair that shimmered under the neon. Her skin had a faint blue glow, and her eyes were wide with fear. Ethan had seen aliens before, but this one looked different, fragile. Almost childlike. She was shaking, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like two tones at once. "Please, I just need a room for the night." Ethan's heart hesitated. He knew what the local rule said. No alien refugees allowed inside human housing. If the patrols found her here, they would find him or worse. But he could see the bruises on her arms, the faint burn marks on her shoulder, and the way she tried to hide her wings under the blanket. They were torn, one of them broken like shattered glass. He sighed and said quietly, 5 credits a night. Pay first." She nodded, her hands shaking as she placed the coins on the counter. Her name, she whispered, was Lyra. When she stepped into the light, Ethan saw that her left foot was bleeding. He fetched a rag and handed it to her without thinking. She looked at him with confusion, as if kindness was something she had never seen. Ethan led her to a small room on the second floor. It was nothing more than a bed, a heater, and a cracked mirror. When he turned to leave, she said softly, "Thank you." That simple word stayed in his mind longer than it should have. Downstairs, Ethan poured himself a cup of cheap coffee. He told himself he had done the right thing. Nothing more, nothing less, but as the hours passed, he could still hear faint sounds from upstairs, a whimper, a clatter, and something else. Like metal scraping against metal, he tried to ignore it. Yet curiosity kept him awake. Around midnight, the inn's lights flickered. He looked out the window and saw 2 drones hovering near the alley. Scanning the building, his heart started pounding. If they detected alien life inside, he would be arrested. He ran upstairs quietly and opened Lyra's door. The room was dark except for the soft blue glow of her skin. She was sitting on the floor, wrapping something metallic around her broken wing. It looked like a piece of alien tech, a medical repair device. Small but powerful, Ethan whispered, "What are you doing?" "You'll bring the patrols here." She looked up, tears shining in her strange eyes. "They already found me once," she said. "I can't let them find me again." Ethan didn't understand, but he felt the fear in her voice. He went to the window and pulled the curtain tighter, hiding the glow. Outside, the drones moved closer, their red lights flashing through the cracks. Ethan turned off the room's power switch, and the building went silent. Both of them waited, not breathing. Minutes felt like hours finally. The drones drifted away, disappearing into the fog. Ethan turned back to Lyra, who was still trembling. He wanted to ask her who she was running from, but the look in her eyes told him she had already lost too much. Instead, he said softly, "You can stay here tonight, but after that, you need to find another place." She nodded, whispering, "I'll be gone before sunrise." Ethan went back downstairs, but sleep never came. Every sound made him flinch. Every memory of her voice echoed in his mind. He had seen refugees before, cold, hungry, desperate. But something about this girl was different. She didn't look like someone hiding from war. She looked like someone hiding from her own kind. At dawn, Ethan walked to her door to tell her it was time to leave. But when he knocked, there was no answer. He pushed the door open slowly. The bed was empty, the blanket neatly folded. For a moment, he thought she had gone. Then he noticed something small on the table, a silver feather with dried blood at the edge, and under it, a single line scratched into the wood with shaky letters. "Thank you for giving me one night of peace." Ethan stood there, staring at the words. The morning light fell through the broken blinds, painting the feather with gold. He felt something stir inside him, something heavy and warm. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew one thing. He would never forget the night he rented a room he shouldn't have rented. Ethan thought the girl was gone forever. But that night, just as the city lights went dark again, The door of his inn creaked open. Rain poured behind her like a silver curtain, and there she stood, Lyra, the alien girl with broken wings. Her eyes looked even dimmer than before, and her body shook with exhaustion. He should have told her to leave. Yet the words never came out. Did they follow you? He asked quietly. She shook her head, but her eyes said otherwise. Ethan locked the door, shutting out the sound of the wind and the distant patrol sirens. When he turned, Lyra had collapsed onto the floor, her breathing shallow. He lifted her up gently and placed her on the couch, feeling how light she was, almost weightless like glass. When he rolled up her sleeve to check her arm, he froze. Her veins glowed faintly through the skin, lines of blue light pulsing like tiny circuits, and there were symbols burned into her shoulder, alien letters that looked branded rather than tattooed. They shimmered when the light hit them, as if alive. What did they do to you? Ethan whispered. Lyra's voice cracked as she said, "They called it research." Her words trembled like broken metal. "They took me from my home world, said they wanted peace, but they turned us into test subjects." She looked down, hiding the tears that sparkled like shards of crystal. Ethan clenched his fists, anger rising. He had heard rumors about secret labs run by the Galactic Authority, places where non-compliant aliens were dissected or changed, but seeing it here breathing in front of him made the stories real. He whispered, "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you again." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if that was true. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the thin walls. Ethan went to close the shutters, and through the fog he saw shadows. 3 dark figures standing near the corner of the alley. Not drones this time, but men. Their helmets carried the symbol of the Galactic Patrol. He ducked, heart racing, and turned off every light. Lyra's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "They found me," she said softly. "They always find me." Ethan moved fast. Pulling the old generator cables from the wall, he dragged a heavy crate over the window, his breath loud in his ears when he looked back. Lyra was opening a small metal box she had carried with her. Inside the box were shards of crystal glowing with pale light, and a small silver device with spinning rings, something far too advanced for human hands. She pressed it to her broken wing, and it hummed with energy. The room filled with blue light, and the wound began to close slowly. Like fabric repairing itself, Ethan watched in awe, whispering, "You're healing yourself." Lyra nodded weakly. "This is the last one I have. After that, there's nothing." A sound came from outside, boots stepping on wet ground. The men were getting closer, their flashlights slicing through the fog. Ethan's pulse quickened. He grabbed the old laser welder from his workshop. His only defense, Lyra looked at him in shock. "You'll die if you fight them." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I'm not letting them take you." They waited in silence. The footsteps stopped right outside the door, and a voice spoke through a comm unit. "Sector sweep. Thermal scan shows 2 heat signatures." Ethan's heart stopped. Then, a burst of light flashed through the window, shattering glass across the room. Lyra screamed, covering her eyes, the air sizzling with energy. Ethan grabbed her hand and pulled her through the back hallway. They burst into the narrow service corridor that led to the basement. The ceiling shook as gunfire tore through the walls. He led her down the stairs, coughing through the smoke. In the dim light, Lyra stumbled, and the silver box fell from her hands. Breaking open from the broken box, a hologram flickered into life. A projection of an alien city, floating in the air, tall towers, crystal rivers, and winged beings flying under golden skies. It was beautiful, but there was more. A human insignia appeared above it, the same logo as the Galactic Authority. Then a voice echoed from the hologram. "Subject 47L, classified as weapon prototype, recover immediately." Ethan stared in disbelief. "You were part of their project," he whispered. Lyra nodded slowly, tears falling. "I escaped, but they don't want me gone, they want me erased." Outside, heavy boots clanged on the metal stairs. Getting closer, Ethan looked around desperately. He pulled a rusted metal hatch on the floor and found the old sewage tunnel beneath. "Go," he said, "now." Lyra hesitated. "You'll be caught." He shook his head. "I've been invisible my whole life. I can handle it." He pushed her toward the tunnel, the smell of rust and water filling the air. She looked back one last time, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" Ethan smiled faintly, his face lit by the glow of her skin. "Because I rented you a room and somehow you made it feel like home." as she slipped into the darkness below. Ethan slammed the hatch shut just as the door above burst open. Armed patrolmen stormed the basement. Shouting orders, Ethan stood in the smoke, hands raised, pretending to surrender, but in his pocket, he held the tiny silver feather she had left behind, glowing softly, alive with alien light, and he knew, deep inside, this was only the beginning. The sound of boots echoed through the old basement. Ethan stood with his hands raised as armed patrolmen swept the room, their weapons glowing red under the smoke. One of them shoved him hard against the wall. Searching his pockets, the silver feather almost slipped out, but Ethan hid it in his palm, pressing it tight against his skin. "Where is the alien girl?" the officer barked. Ethan shook his head, pretending to be confused. "What girl? No one's been here." A punch landed on his stomach. Forcing him to his knees, he gasped but stayed silent. The patrol leader scanned the basement, his visor flashing with heat signatures. "Clear," he said after a moment. "She's gone underground." Ethan kept his head low until their footsteps faded. When the sound was gone, he exhaled shakily. Blood dripped from his lip, but he smiled faintly, whispering, "You made it out, kid." He limped upstairs and looked around. His small inn was nothing but broken glass and smoke now. He knew he couldn't stay. Not after this. The patrol would return, and this time, they would bring reinforcements. He grabbed a small backpack, stuffed it with tools, a water bottle, and an old radio. Before leaving, he looked one last time at the door where Lyra had first appeared. For some reason, it didn't feel like goodbye. Outside, the streets were quiet. He followed the drainage path behind the alley. The air smelled of oil and ash at the end of the tunnel. He found the broken hatch that led to the underground system, the same way he had told Lyra to go. He climbed down into the darkness. The tunnel stretched for miles under the city. Ethan used a small flashlight to move forward, the beam cutting through thick dust. He walked for nearly an hour before he saw something that stopped him. Small blue fingerprints glowing faintly on the wall, Lyra's trail. She was still alive, and she was close when he finally found her. She was sitting by an old drainage pipe, her wings folded tight, her face pale and tired. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "You came back," she whispered. He smiled. "Didn't think I'd let you get all the adventure." Lyra laughed softly, the sound echoing like music in the dark, but her smile faded fast. "They'll hunt you now too," she said. "You're marked for helping me." Ethan sat beside her, leaning against the cold wall. "Then we'll both be hunted," he replied. "At least we won't be alone." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly for the first time. Ethan noticed something strange, like the glow in her veins was fading. "What's happening?" he asked. Lyra hesitated. "My energy source is running out, the crystal I used to heal. It powers my body too. I don't have much time left." Ethan clenched his jaw. He thought of the galactic labs, of the machines that turned living beings into tools. He couldn't let that be her end. "There's an old shipyard outside the city," he said slowly. "Abandoned since the war. I can get us there." "I still know how to fly old crafts." Lyra's eyes brightened. "You'd risk everything for me?" He smiled. "I already did." They moved together through the tunnels until they reached the outskirts. The surface above them glowed with city lights and drone patterns when they climbed out. They were surrounded by dry desert, red sand stretching to the horizon. It felt endless, silent, and alive with danger. Ethan built a small campfire that night using scrap metal and dry grass. Lyra sat across from him, her wings wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. The flames painted her face with gold, and for a moment she didn't look alien at all. She looked lost, like a soul searching for home. Ethan asked quietly, "What was your world like?" Lyra's eyes softened. "It was full of light," she said. "We built our cities on clouds, and our rivers floated through the air. But when humans came, they brought their machines, their wars. We tried to welcome them, but peace became profit, and soon, my people were sold in pieces." Her voice cracked. "I was one of the last to escape." Ethan felt shame stir inside him. He had once believed humanity was spreading hope among the stars, but now he saw how blind he had been. He reached out and placed his hand gently on hers. "You're safe with me, Lyra," he said. "No one's going to use you again." They sat in silence as the desert wind howled around them. Above, the stars shimmered, some blue, some red, some broken by the clouds of war satellites. Lyra looked up and whispered something in her language. Ethan asked, "What does that mean?" She smiled softly. It means thank you for choosing to see me. The moment was peaceful, almost too peaceful then. The air split with the sound of engines. 3 patrol ships appeared in the distance. Scanning the desert with bright lights, Lyra's face turned pale. They found us again. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the rocks. Run! He shouted. Blasts of energy hit the ground, sand exploding around them. They stumbled through the darkness, hearts pounding. Ethan turned back and fired his welder at a nearby fuel canister. The explosion threw smoke and fire into the air. He didn't look back, he just ran. Lyra stumbled but kept moving, her hand clutching his tightly. When they finally dove behind an old cargo hauler, Ethan's lungs burned, Lyra's wings flickered, faint blue sparks dripping from the broken edges. Ethan looked at her and said, "We can't keep running. We need a real plan." Lyra nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "Then we fight back." Ethan stared at her, realizing for the first time, she wasn't just scared. She was angry, and behind those trembling wings, there was a fire strong enough to shake the stars. The desert wind carried the smell of metal and fear. Ethan and Lyra hid behind the rusted hauler, the stars above them burning like cold fire. The patrol ships circled the dunes, their lights sweeping across the wasteland like searching eyes. Lyra's breathing was shallow, her energy fading again. Ethan could see the faint pulse of blue light under her skin, flickering weaker with every second. "We can't run forever," Ethan said softly, his hand resting on the sand. Lyra looked at him with tired eyes. "Then what do we do?" Ethan stared toward the horizon where faint lights glimmered. "The shipyard," he whispered. "If we reach it, maybe there's still something we can fly. Something old enough they won't track." Lyra nodded slowly, trusting him completely now. They moved through the night, following the faint memory of forgotten roads. The sand cut at their faces, and the ground trembled whenever patrol ships passed overhead. Hours later, they reached a cliff overlooking a vast graveyard of broken starships. Hundreds of metal giants lay half buried in the sand, silent reminders of wars humanity wanted to forget. Ethan's heart twisted at the sight. "I worked here once," he said quietly. "Back when I thought I was building peace." Lyra looked around, her wings catching the moonlight. "Your world buries its mistakes deep," she said, not unkindly. Ethan nodded. "Maybe it's time we dig one up." They descended the slope carefully, avoiding sharp metal shards and collapsed tunnels. Ethan found a small freighter that still looked whole, its hull scarred but intact. He pried open the hatch and led Lyra inside. Dust filled the air, but the control panels still glowed faintly when he powered them up. "Old model," he murmured. "Manual ignition. No central tracking." Lyra placed her hand on the console, and the lights brightened. Her alien energy seemed to feed the circuits, making the ship come alive. Ethan stared in surprise. "You can link with machines." Lyra nodded faintly. "My kind were born to shape energy. That's why they wanted us." For a moment, hope flickered in their eyes. Then a voice echoed through the ship's calm, distorted but unmistakable. "Ethan Cole, surrender now, you are surrounded." Ethan froze, recognizing the voice instantly. It was his brother, Captain Marcus Cole of the Galactic Patrol. Lyra looked at him, confused. "Your brother?" Ethan's throat tightened. He must have tracked my ID chip." The ship trembled as searchlights flooded the sky. Ethan slammed his hand on the console. "We can't fight them head on, but maybe we can outfly them." Lyra's eyes glowed brighter. "Then let me help." She reached her hands to the control sphere, energy flowing through her veins like lightning. The ship roared to life, engines screaming as sand exploded beneath it. But before they could lift higher, a beam of light struck the wing, throwing them sideways. They crashed into the dunes, metal tearing and alarms blaring. When Ethan opened his eyes, smoke filled the cabin. Lyra lay beside him, a shard of metal piercing her shoulder, blue light spilling from the wound. "Lyra!" he shouted, pulling the piece free. His hands shaking, she smiled weakly. "It's okay. I can still fly." Ethan's heart twisted. "You're not flying anywhere like this." Through the cracked windshield, he saw soldiers approaching, and in front of them were his brother, standing tall, armored, eyes cold. "Ethan," Marcus called. "You've lost. Hand over the alien and I'll make sure you're treated fairly." Ethan stepped out of the ship, his weapon drawn. "You call this fair?" "She's a person, not a thing," Marcus sighed. "She's a threat. She's not human. She's data and power, and if you keep protecting her, you'll both die." Ethan shook his head slowly. Then I'll die human. Lyra stumbled out behind him, her wings half unfolded. Glowing faintly like dying stars, her voice trembled. He's right, Ethan. If I stay, they'll kill you. He turned to her, eyes filled with something deeper than fear. If you go, I'll still lose you, he whispered. I'd rather fight beside you than live without you. Tears shimmered in her alien eyes. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. Humans, she whispered, always breaking rules for love. Then, without another word, she spread her damaged wings and rose into the air. Energy flared from her body, blinding light filling the desert. Marcus shouted an order, but his voice drowned under the roar of power. Lyra's light burst into a radiant storm, knocking soldiers back, melting their armor. Ethan ran toward her, shielding his face, screaming her name. She looked down one last time, her voice echoing through his mind. I can't be free if you're gone, so I'll take you with me. The light swallowed everything. When it faded, the patrol ships were gone, the desert silent and the old freighter still burning. Ethan lay motionless in the sand, Lyra beside him, unconscious but breathing. Her wings were gone, only scars left where they had been. Ethan lifted her gently, tears falling as he whispered, You gave up your wings for me. She stirred weakly, her voice soft as a dream. And you gave up your world for me. He looked up at the dawn rising over the dunes. For the first time, the light felt warm. He didn't know where they would go next, or if they would ever be safe, but he knew one thing. Love, even across stars, always comes with a price. The desert had gone quiet again. Only the wind moved across the dunes, whispering through the wreckage of ships that had fallen from the sky. Ethan opened his eyes slowly, his head heavy, his chest burning with pain. He felt warmth beside him, not the fire of engines, but the steady pulse of life. Lyra lay near him, her skin pale and her glow faint like the last ember of a dying star. He pushed himself up, coughing, his vision blurry. The wrecked freighter lay half buried in sand, its hull still smoking. The patrol ships were gone. Only black marks across the horizon remained. He looked down at Lyra, her once brilliant wings now just scars traced with silver light. She had given up the thing that made her free. Just to keep him alive, Ethan lifted her carefully, carried her into the shade of the broken ship. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, whispering her name again and again. After a long silence, her eyes opened, soft and uncertain. Are we dead? She asked weakly. He smiled through the pain. Not yet. You stubborn angel. She tried to laugh but coughed instead. The blue light in her veins flickered like a heartbeat. I can't feel the sky anymore, she said. Looking toward the dawn, Ethan held her hand. Then I'll be your sky from now on. They stayed there until the suns rose higher. Ethan searched the broken freighter and found an emergency pod half buried under the cargo bay. It was small, just enough for 2 people if they didn't mind being close. He worked through the day repairing it, using scrap metal, battery cells, and pieces of Lyra's fallen feathers as conduits. Each piece shimmered with energy when touched by light. Lyra watched him, her eyes following every movement. You fix things even when they're broken beyond repair, she said softly. He wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. That's what humans do. We break, we fall, we fix, and we try again. When night came, he had the pod ready, the engines humming weakly. He turned to her and said, We're leaving this world. Lyra shook her head slowly. I can't go far. My energy won't last through orbit. Ethan's voice hardened. Then I'll give you mine. He linked a power cable from his suit's life support unit to her veins. The light in her body brightened, the glow returning to her eyes. Ethan, she whispered, you'll die. He smiled. Maybe, but you'll live, and that's enough. She stared at him, tears shimmering in her alien eyes. No, she said firmly. I didn't stay alive just to watch you fade. Before he could answer, she pressed her hands to the control panel, flooding it with her energy. The engines roared, lifting them off the sand, the ground falling away beneath. The stars stretched across the black sky like rivers of fire. Ethan felt his strength fading. The pod shaking under pressure, Lyra leaned against him. Whispering something in her native tongue, he asked weakly, What does that mean? She smiled faintly. It means hold on, the light is close. The pod broke through the clouds. Leaving the desert behind for the first time, Lyra saw the world from above, a ball of golden dust floating in the endless dark. Her eyes widened and she whispered, It's beautiful. Ethan nodded. You are too. Minutes later, the engine sputtered. warning lights flashing red. They had just enough power to reach a small moon ahead, its surface glowing faintly with life. Lyra guided the pod with trembling hands. When they landed, soft soil cushioned their fall, and silence returned. They were safe, at least for now. Weeks passed on that quiet moon. Ethan built a small shelter from parts of the wreck. Lyra helped him grow food using her energy to make the soil breathe again. Together they made a home not of metal or light, but of peace. Some nights Ethan would find her standing outside. Looking at the stars, she would say softly, "They still call me home," and Ethan would answer, "Then tell them you already found one." In time, others came, lost travelers, escaped workers, wounded soldiers. Ethan and Lyra gave them food, safety, and hope. People began to call the place Haven, a word that meant shelter in every language. Ethan repaired ships for free and Lyra healed the sick. Humans and aliens alike began to believe in something new, a future built on kindness, not control. One night, long after the others had gone to sleep, Lyra sat beside Ethan under the silver trees. She leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I was made to be a weapon, but you turned me into a person." He smiled, holding her hand gently. "And you turned me into something better than human." They sat in silence as meteors crossed the sky, lighting it with streaks of blue and gold. Ethan looked up and said quietly, "You know, I once paid 5 credits for a room that changed my life." Lyra smiled, her eyes glowing softly. "And I once found a man who taught me what freedom feels like." As the stars drifted across the heavens, the light of the twin suns slowly rising again, Ethan closed his eyes, feeling her heartbeat against his. Maybe tomorrow the world would find them. Maybe not, but for tonight, in that quiet moonlight, humanity and hope shared the same breath. And the girl who was once broken had finally found the place she could stay forever.